triste en este día. Oh, madre mía, tú muy querida, de que estás triste en este día. Queridos hijitos, lloraba la mancilla, que amargó a nuestra familia. Queridos hijitos, lloraba la mancilla, que amargó. La defiende, la quieren más.
In 1958 or 59, whenever the revolution took over, organized religion was discouraged, and that was a political, ideological issue. But in 1992 or 1993, when religions were encouraged and accepted again, and therefore only within the last 36 months, this Jewish population re-identified themselves and have come out very quickly in a very organized fashion.
And during one afternoon, I decided to go see if there was a temple, Jewish temple. And I came across the Patronato, and I just walked in, introduced myself to whoever was there, and they were very appreciative that a Jewish person from anywhere would come to see how they were doing, but particularly being from the United States. So they gave me a tour through the social hall and the library, which was quite impressive, and the sanctuary, which had broken windows, but many of the seats were in disrepair. Birds were flying around, but it was their place of worship. And to them, it was very spiritual, and this is what they had. And after talked with them for about an hour and a half or so, I wanted to give them something, and I pulled out my wallet. I said, "I'd like to give you something." And they said, "Well, if you'd really like to give us something, have the Jews in America come visit us so we don't feel we're forgotten." And I said, "Well, how about Passover?" They said, "Gee, that would be great." And we left thinking it was a nice dream, and that was it.
I have no idea of what to expect. You know, it was a re-encountering, a rekindling of something that was faint in my life, was almost dying.
To come and celebrate the Passover with us. Now we're here. Next year, may we be in the land of Israel. Now we're slaves. Next year, may we be free men.
Judaism has always, especially in the provinces, has been something that was practiced more in the homes, you know, it's very private. In Havana, there was, of course, a very rich Jewish life, but after the revolution, 90% of the Jews left. Now, in this whole revival, that you take anything that that is a manifestation of Jewish culture, things like mezuzahs or books, and people just devour them.
When we were in Havana at the Patronato, and then also in Santiago, the same thing. You saw so many children and so many young people, and young people say of teenage years taking such important roles in doing things. But here it's the young people, and many times then bringing their, it's almost like it's skipped a generation. Their grandfathers were involved, but then their parents were not because of all these many years, and now they've gotten involved again, and they're bringing their parents back in. For example, this young man that, the young boy that he mentioned earlier there in Cienfuegos, who was the Hebrew teacher. He was about 12 or 13, and I remember I said something to him. I said, well, you're very young to be a teacher, aren't you? And he said, I know more than everybody else, so that makes me the teacher.
En otras noches comemos toda clase de verdura. Esta noche especialmente hierbas amargas. En otras noches no tenemos que mojar nuestra verdura en condimentos de menudo. Esta noche, 2 veces, unas hierbas en agua salada y las hierbas amargas en el jarocero. En otras noches comemos, ya sea sentados o recostados. Esta noche no se recostados.
Knowledge in Cuba today seems to be a very precious possession.
Esta noche solamente sin levadura. En otras noches comemos toda clase de verduras. Esta noche especialmente hierbas amargas.
Hacia el mismo lugar. Roberto, Oleg, Levi, Shel, Rahel, Bellacó. Abal, ¿sabes lo que es Abal? Pero, Jacob, Oleg, Abaita. You know that in the diaspora and everywhere, if you don't know enough about your roots, the assimilation is always surrounded us.
En Cuba no hay antisemitismo.
In Cuba, there's no anti-Semitism.
Si ustedes van por la calle y si hablaran español todavía comprenderían más que la gente es muy tratable, muy amable, muy sociable.
If you go out in the street and you speak enough Spanish, you see that people are really nice, really social, really verbal.
Y que yo me siento cubano.
Because he feels like he's Cuban, besides being Jewish.
You know, here we never had anti-Semitism, either before or now of the revolution, because here in this country there is no tradition of anti-Semitism.
I was very positively surprised by the amount of knowledge and learning they had already picked up, basically in a few years. People had learned Hebrew, they were singing songs, they were playing games. Obviously, they don't have anywhere near the culture and the opportunities that we have in the States. But compared to what I imagined, it was much, much richer.
We were able to bring enough supplies in one duffel bag, they said, to keep the school in school supplies for a year. Just one duffel bag. We brought afikoman presents, and they didn't know the tradition of looking for the afikoman and you get a present. So the person who found the afikoman came and collected their present, and then, unbeknownst to me, took the present, which was a school supply kit with pencils and sharpeners and crayons, and opened it up and divided everything that was in the present equally among all the kids.
Dr. Miller is the president of the Jewish community in Cuba. And the night of the second night of the Seder, I was sitting next to him at dinner. And in a friendly fashion, I said, well, how many children do you have? And he says, well, I have 4. I said, well, where do they live? And he said, well, 2 live in the United States, in Miami, and 1 lives in Canada. and the fourth is sitting over there, and he's moving to Israel next week, next Tuesday. And I stopped and I said, well, when was the last time that you saw your children? And Dr. Miller is 72 years old. And he says, well, I saw my daughter in Canada about 3 or 4 years ago. And I said, what about your children who are living in Miami? Oh, they couldn't come because they're refugee status and they couldn't cross the Canadian border. And I said, what about your younger son after he moves to Israel? And he says, well, I probably won't see him again unless he makes enough money to buy an airplane ticket back to Cuba. And I suddenly realized that this man bore 4 children that he loved dearly and probably would not have the opportunity of ever seeing them again in his life. And that really brought home the level of isolation which people living in Cuba suffer.
Mirar el pan de la pobreza que comieron nuestros antepasados en Egipto. Que vengan y coman todos los que tengan hambre.
Now we are here. Next year, may we be in the land of Israel. Now we are slaves. Next year, may we be free men.
Another highlight I felt was the visit that we had with Clarita Bear and her husband. It was a story of nostalgia, and it was a story also of separation, of family divisions. In the case of Clarita, we talked about her life in Turkey and her family and coming to Cuba.
Con su uniforme de la escuela.
You see in Cuba almost everywhere you go very tragic cases, very sad cases of people who have a brother or a sister that they haven't seen in years and years. In the case of Clarita's husband, you know, who has a daughter in Miami and grandchildren, and yet they, you know, you saw how he cried, how he kind of, you know, it was almost an uncontrollable type of sadness that overcame him, and there's like no contact with him, and yet you saw with what love he brings the pictures, you know, and he's so proud of that family that he doesn't even know he's my grandchild, this is my great granddaughter, and this and that, and it's yeah. And yet it's almost like they don't want to know about him. You know, he feels that he's been abandoned, and to me it's so sad. You know, he's a man who left Poland. You know, during probably one of the worst times of in the history of Judaism, and here now he's living. You know, in his old age, he probably doesn't have too many years left, and he's living with that pain of not knowing his daughter and his grandchildren, not having any contact with him. And you saw in his house that there are many needs, many basic things that could be fixed just with a little bit of aid from the family in the United States.
We were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt. El jaján, término que se ha interpretado de varios modos, como sabio, avispado, inteligente o maduro.
The Torah speaks of 4 types of children, one who is wise and one who is contrary, one who is simple and one who does not even know how to ask a question.
The simple son asked, "What is this?" To him you shall say, "With a strong hand the Eternal brought us out of Egypt." of bondage.
This is the promise that has sustained our ancestors and us.
Interesting part about the services was that 50 American people walked into a room with 50 or 100 Cubans. Most didn't speak each other's language. Everybody had never met each other before that night. And suddenly we had found a common ground, or immediately we had found a common ground, which was that Passover service.
These are the 10 plagues which the Holy One, blessed be He, brought upon the Egyptians in Egypt. And they are blood, kimim, vermin, shechin, boils, barad, hail,
Sometimes the people think that the Jews that stay here, always they were a part of the government. They think so, but this is not. This is not the reality. Mm-hmm. Because here, many of the Jews that of us that we are here now, we are here. This is our country, this is our family. Here we were born, but if we stay here, that was for other reasons.
For other reasons.
But not only by we like revolution, or no. Some like revolution, mm-hmm. Others not.
Is it for tonight?
Yeah, for tonight.
Uh-huh. What are you making?
Rice, beans, black beans, rice, eggs, and salad.
Se acerca mi lado a fin de 2 minutos. El pájaro voló a fin de 2 minutos. El pájaro voló. El pájaro volando.
Debemos recordar que fuimos esclavos en Egipto y salimos de la esclavitud a la libertad de esclavos y que la matzá que tenemos en la mano.
There's not only a revival of Judaism, there's a great deal of interest in religion. For so many years, the government nurtured this anti-religious attitude. Cuba has gone through a tremendous upheaval with the demise of the Soviet Union. And the government has liberalized its position towards religion. So people seem to be seeking some spiritual connection, and those who had that Jewish connection are looking into the synagogues and looking into their own roots and trying to find some spiritual uplifting through their own traditions.
Elohim numeres haolam, asher kichanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu, al ahilah maror. Amén. Bueno, ahora vamos a hacer la explicación del coré. El coré es una especie de sándwiches que se hace con la matzá, se pica a la mitad, así, y se debe de hierbas amargas, tierra, y se hace como un bocadito. Eso quiere decir el coré, y significa la libertad y la esclavitud.
We eat the bitter herbs and the matzah, and we say in remembrance of the holy temple we do, as Hillel did in temple times. We put the matzah and bitter herbs together and ate them as a sandwich in order to observe literally the words of the Torah. They shall eat it, the Passover offering, with matzah and bitter herbs.
Matzah umaror v'ochel biyachad. V'kayem ma shenemar. Al matzot umarorim yacholu.
And then the second night, the first song which was sung, the children, there must have been more children there the second night, or the children were prepared or had practiced or something, because the angels sang. And there was the religious aspect of it, but then there was the spiritual aspect of it. And as the angels sang, and through the voices of those children, chills and tears and the whole special nature of why we were there came rising to the surface.
Another side of this was also the spiritual life, your connection not only to a family, but to a people, to a tradition. You start asking who you are and what gives meaning to your life. And so I made a commitment, that I must fight to see that families are not used to further political objectives. As much as I can, I don't think that the suffering of human beings should be used as weapons to dictate a democratic government or to pressure a dictator or a government to change its position.
When I returned and people asked, how was the service? I said, I learned one thing. It doesn't matter whether I'm in San Francisco or Havana or probably Jerusalem. On a Passover, it's all the same. And it makes me know that I have a global family as part of my religious background.
I wrote a letter to President Clinton when I came back. Dear President, I went to Cuba for Passover, and I had a really wonderful time, but the only part I didn't really like was when I saw what people did when we came through U.S. Customs. They took cigars and broke them one by one and threw them away. They smashed dolls and they did all these horrible things. And like with my dad, they took all the rum he bought and the cigars, but they didn't find my dog. Ha 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 ha.
And did you get
Why did they do that?
Because a long, long time ago, I think that Cuba did something bad to California, so now California still doesn't like Cuba for what they did.
Eso.